plants and bathe it in ammonia to kill the E. coli. At this point, the question you should be asking yourself is, what is the end game? As I detail in my book, Modern Slavery and the Fight for Freedom, it's all about control. The food industry, in collusion with the government, wants to control the consumer, the farmer, and the worker. The question is, why? If you said profit and power, you are correct. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. There is more, a much more sinister reason. Population control and control of the world's resources. Before you go to this next slide, if you have small children watching, I encourage you to have them leave the room because the next 3 or 4 slides are particularly graphic. As I detail in my book, Modern Slavery, it took 10,000 generations for the world's population to reach 2 billion, and now in the span of 1 generation, it has exploded to 7 billion, and is expected that in another generation, it will be 12 billion. The financial elite who control the governments of the world and the resources of the world simply cannot tolerate a population of 7 to 12 billion people. Overpopulation is the #1 problem facing the world, and the financial elite intend to reduce population to what they consider to be a sustainable level, which is somewhere below 2 billion. The Bible tells us that in the end times there will be great tribulations, and approximately 90% of the world's population will die. God isn't going to bring these tribulations on mankind, but He is, however, going to allow mankind to bring them on Himself. The quote that I'm about to read you is from Task Force Delta, a U.S. think tank, and it says, and I quote, "1/4 of humanity must be eliminated from the social body. We are in charge of God's selection process for planet Earth. He selects, we destroy. We are the riders of the pale horse." The Bible tells us there will be a time when there will be worldwide famine. Never in the history of the world has man possessed the technology to literally starve to death millions or billions of people. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but theoretically, if Monsanto Chemical Company were to get control of the world's food supply, and we were to move into a one-world government, and that government were to decide that the population needed to be reduced to, say, 2 billion or less, they would have the technology. They could deny grain to the world. Plus, there's a technology that I outlined in one of my other presentations, a project called HARP, which has the ability to affect the stratosphere, and in so doing affect weather patterns. So theoretically, the U.S. and other governments of the world possess a technology whereby they could cause droughts in nations around the world, further reducing the world's population. Global sustainability requires deliberate quest of poverty, reduced resource consumption, and set levels of mortality control. The planet is in the midst of the 6th mass extinction, and that is a scientific fact. And the time has come when food and energy must be taken out of the hands of the financial elite and made available to all of mankind. Every 3.6 seconds, a person dies of hunger, and 75% of them are children. In my book, Modern Slavery and the Fight for Freedom, I delineate exactly how and why the President and Congress are becoming increasingly irrelevant puppets of a group of financial elite, international bankers, and corporate leaders who ostensibly control the United States government and governments around the world, and who are systematically moving to move us towards a one-world government where they will have literal dictatorial control. With that in mind, I want to point your attention to Europe, who is much further along the road to socialism than we are. One of the primary ways that socialism has been imposed on Europe is through the implementation of czars, who are bureaucrats, who will pass regulations that legislators are not yet willing to pass, and systematically have moved Europe into the realm of socialism. That is precisely what is happening in the United States of America today, and so I draw your attention to Obama's 12 dancing czars. And I assure you, we'll take an example, which is cap and trade, that if Obama cannot get cap and trade passed, that he will use Cass Sunstein, the regulatory czar, in order to implement regulations that will give him effectively that same control. Henry Kissinger, who is far from one of my favorite political figures, said, and I quote it in my book, "The illegal we do immediately, the unconstitutional takes a little longer." Before narrating this slide, I want to refer briefly back to the last slide. When I made the claim that the President and Congress were becoming increasingly irrelevant, I imagine many of you thought that's just conspiracy talk, but I assure you folks it's not. In my book, Modern Slavery and the Fight for Freedom, I can assure you that I substantiate that statement carefully. I looked through the history of the United States of America and followed the presidencies from Franklin Delano Roosevelt up to Obama and systematically showed how the pieces of legislation that were passed in those administrations have systematically led us towards socialism and put us on the precipice of being in a position to be moved into the one world government. I urge you to find out the truth. It is crucially important that we know. In the Bible it says, "My people perish for lack of knowledge." So I have made it my lifelong commitment to make sure that the American people understand and are aware of the truth. Now, getting back to this slide, most of you are probably not aware of what Codex is, but it is crucially important that you understand. The Codex is ostensibly supposed to be an organization that protects our health, but that's not really what it is. It is first and foremost a trade commission, which operates under the World Trade Organization and is administered by the World Health Organization, the Food and Agriculture Organization, under the auspices of the United Nations. It is a global entity that is moving to control access to food and again to put us in a position where a financial elite have control over the population of the world. That's why you should care. It has nothing to do with protecting your health, quite to the contrary. Codex serves the interest of Big Pharma, Big Chema, Big Biotechna, Big Agribiz, and Big Meta. Pure and simple. It does not protect the interest of the American people, and you need to understand why. Continuing with the reasons that you need to be familiar with the Codex, first of all, it prohibits information about disease being treatable by nutrients and calls for criminalization of therapeutic doses of supplements and nutrients. Nutrients are declared to be toxins. They will be treated in much the same way as heroin and other illegal narcotics. Secondly, it mandates that every animal on the planet must be treated with Monsanto's growth hormone and with antibiotics. It mandates that all food be irradiated unless consumed locally and raw. It mandates that all or most food must be genetically modified. And it sets limits for dangerous chemicals in food, but the limits are dangerously high. Continuing with the reasons why you need to be aware of Codex. In 2001, 176 nations banned 12 dangerous organic chemicals. 9 of them were pesticides, and Codex has reintroduced the use of 7 of the 9 banned pesticides. Or in other words, thanks to Codex, 7 of the world's most dangerous substances are now in our food chain. Moving on, currently, substances are considered legal unless specified otherwise. Codex stipulates changing the law so that substances are illegal unless specified legal. Cost-prohibitive test procedures will all but drive health food stores out of business. According to the WTO and AFO projections, quote, implementation of 2009 vitamin and mineral guidelines will result in a minimum of 1 billion deaths by starvation and 2 billion deaths from preventable diseases associated with malnutrition. Folks, what did I tell you before? There is a plan to reduce the world's population, and Codex is going to be used as part of the implementation of that plan. It's time we recognize the fact that cheap food is an illusion. If you consider environmental and health costs, U.S. food is the most expensive in the world. It is because of the fast food industry and processed food industry that we have an epidemic of obesity. and it is also the precipitating cause of most of the preventable illnesses that not only are costing millions of lives, but billions of dollars. This is a battle we must win. Our health and that of our children are at risk. If we allow Monsanto and the government to control our food supply, we will be dependent on them for our very survival. Most of the political instability around the globe is a result of food prices and food shortages. Time to act before it is too late. What can we do? We have a lot more power than we think. We took on the tobacco industry and won, and we can take on the food and drug industry and win as well. How? As I said before, vote with your pocketbook. Demand organic foods. Retailers will respond to lost revenues. Get politically active. Tell Congress to enforce food safety standards. Push for farm subsidies on fruits and vegetables versus corn and grain. Push to get mind-altering sugar, salt, and fat-laden foods out of the schools. Support local farmers markets and make sure they accept food stamps. Plant a garden and learn to can and dehydrate your own food. Closing comments. The government is controlling access to the necessities of life and pitting us against each other. Unless we want to live under a one-world dictatorship, we had better take a stand. The New World Order cannot happen without U.S. participation because we are the world's only truly global superpower. If you are interested in having me speak at your church or community group, I can be reached at larry@libertycrusade.com or by phone at 630-202-2354. Additional presentations are available on my website at libertycrusade.com or on YouTube. I urge you to help me get this information out to the general public, so please send the link to this presentation to all of your friends. Note, please contact me if you are interested in a joint venture to produce political documentaries.